If we look at Joaquin Chapo Guzman, who is a very similar figure who is alive today, we see a very parallel story. He was born in 1954 in Sinaloa, which is also a drug region in Mexico. He entered the drug business very young. He is now the largest drug trafficker in the world, although as of the time I'm recording, he has been caught again and he's being perhaps extradited in the future to the United States. But for very many years, he was the largest drug trafficker in the world. The Chicago Crime Commission called him public enemy number one. He was incarcerated in the 1990s and escaped through a laundry basket. He was incarcerated again and escaped through an underground tunnel through his shower or his bathroom, a maximum security federal prison in Mexico. And so he's similar in the sense that he got involved in drugs young and that he was incarcerated and escaped several times. He's similar in that he has a very high business acumen. He was known for anticipating market trends and what kind of drugs people would do in different places. And while Pablo Escobar made more money, you could argue that Joaquin Chapo Guzman was more successful, not in the amount of money he made, but in the sense that he exported a wider variety of drugs and he diversified the market in a lot of ways. Pablo Escobar sold cocaine. That was what he did all over the world. Chapo Guzman sells methamphetamines and heroin and marijuana and cocaine and any kind of drug that he anticipates might be popular. He also is a very violent person, and his cartel has created a lot of chaos within Mexico, although some argue that other cartels even have created more chaos. But he's similar in so many ways, and the Sinaloa cartel also is a cartel or an organization that does charity and gives away money, and so they court the favor of people, especially in that Sinaloa district, and that's one of the reasons why it's been so hard to catch him at different points, because people won't talk and people will aid and abet him. But despite the fact that he has created a lot of problems in Mexico, and despite the fact that he's been a large purveyor of drugs, you can't argue the fact that he wasn't brilliant and he didn't have a high business acumen. And one of the things that we have to realize about both Chapo Guzman and Pablo Escobar is that they did have a lot of intelligence and that they both probably would have been successful in any walk of life that they chose. Chapo Guzman gave an article or a interview in a Rolling Stone article with Sean Penn recently where he talked about the fact that if there were other opportunities for him growing up, he would have taken them, but the terrible economy of Mexico pushed him into the drug trade. So what connects these two very large drug figures? They are the two most preeminent drug cartel bosses. They are two figures of the drug trade that the DEA has gone after in its kingpin strategy. They both share a very similar life history, and you could argue that the removal of each will not solve the drug problem, because the drug problem is intricately related to the demand of drugs and not necessarily the fact that there are big cartel bosses who are smart and have figured out how to sell drugs. You could make the argument that even with their removal, that the drug industry is going to go on as it has in the past, and just as getting rid of Pablo Escobar did not kill the cocaine trade, getting rid of Chapo Guzman is not going to kill the transport of drugs from Mexico to the Western world, such as the United States and Western Europe. If you're to look at the kingpin strategy from a critical perspective and look to critique it, you could argue that it promotes violence within drug organizations. So if you have a cartel leader, they can impose a kind of order. Their word is the law. And you're going to see a part of the film that we watch about Colombia next week that talks about how Medellin spiraled into more violence after Pablo Escobar was executed. You could also argue that the drug issue is a demand issue. So we oftentimes view it as a supply issue. We have these cartel bosses out there and these cartels that are very violent, and they will provide drugs, and we might see that as the problem. And as if you provide the drugs, then maybe Americans are going to try them. But you could turn that over on its head and say that we have a serious drug issue in the United States, and that the demand for drugs is very high, and because it's an illicit trade, it's a very profitable and lucrative trade, and that there are always going to be people who take that risk to enter that trade, no matter what you do with drug kingpins in terms of getting rid of them. In other words, as long as the demand is high, the supply will come from somewhere, somehow, and in some way. And so we have to see the drug business from a larger perspective. And as we talk about Mexico today, and you do your readings and you watch your films about Colombia next week, remember to try to see the drug business and the drug issue from the larger context of the global economic environment. Remember that this is an industry, and it's a very profitable industry. And remember also to see it within the larger context of Latin American society. Remember that there is a lot of poverty and a lot of systemic corruption. And remember that there has traditionally been an elite sector of people which have access to the majority of the money and resources in Latin America, and then a lot of poor people. And remember that that will always be an option for people so long as there is that industry to find quick money and lots of it. So now I'm going to point you towards Beachboard, and we'll continue our discussion on drugs, Mexico, and in Latin America.